Elizabeth frowned at her father's request, not having made it one step out of the stuffy, dust-layered hole that was their living room. This was her third attempt at leaving, and once more had the confused man called out for her in that all-too-familiar way, voice heavy with contempt. It was the same loveless cadence she recognized from the 40-odd years they had lived in the house together, though the energy behind it was now weak and smoldering, like a fire in need of stoking. She took a moment to consider the question, first the blanket, then the ashtray, now this. It was true that her father had been a rather excessive smoker in his prime, perhaps contributing to his aforementioned asthenia, but she had never heard of such an accessory. Smoking glasses? Was she to look for a smoking wristwatch too? Do you mean your smoking jacket? She had never before seen her father wear such a thing, but it was not impossible that one might be upstairs in the attic, tucked away in some half-crumbled box with all the other forgotten mementos from the man's younger years. No, useless girl, I need my smoking glasses. Elizabeth stammered, trying to find some combination of words that would smother his growing ire. His hate-filled eyes burned into hers, forcing her to withdraw. I'll see if I can find them. The statement seemed to appease him. He turned and slouched into the old armchair, plucking a cigarette from a nearby dish and placing it between his lips. A flame popped into existence with the flick of his thumb and perfectly singed its end. The movement was practically automatic. Elizabeth knew it would be one of the last things to go as his mind fully collapsed in. As long as her father could still partake in his favorite habit, she would not be free, not quite yet. She walked out of the room and into the kitchen, feeling like she could use a cigarette herself, did she not find the activity so revolting. For a reason that eluded her even now, her father had forced her to try one at no older than 10 or 11. Countless nightmares of choking breaths and loose yellow teeth followed. She was sure that fateful puff had contributed to her asthma diagnosis. Feeling out of sorts, she retired to her usual place of recuperation, a chair by the open window. Though Elizabeth had much to complain about in her dragging, unhappy life, the view was certainly not one of those things. From the back of her faded, broken-down house was a bright, grassy plain filled with foxes, squirrels, and all sorts of woodland critters. It was a beautiful sight, not just in the summer months, but all year round, even when the ground stood firm with white and the skeletal trees rapped against the walls like they did when she was little. Now was autumn, and those trees were painted a flaming orange, just starting to lose their leaves. In moments like this, she pictured herself as a Snow White of sorts, humming a beautiful tune while smiling animals surrounded her, making her feel at home. No sooner than the thought came to her did a bird land on the windowsill. It made a brief vocalization and tilted its head, showing no signs of fear or trepidation. Elizabeth was stunned. She had scarcely been able to spot a robin in years, let alone have once come to visit her. She scanned the room, checking if she had left any seed out, but there was none. If she didn't know better, she'd have thought the thing was only interested in her. And as that thought came to mind, she heard another. "What do you want, more than anything in the world?" It was only in her head, but some strange gut feeling told her the voice was not hers. She dismissed it instantly, of course. Though she was not in any way brave nor bold, Elizabeth Parsons was an astute, intelligent woman who did not believe in such fanciful things as gnomes and fair folk and talking animals. It was the same kind of rubbish that had consumed her mother in her final years, ranting and raving about the fiction of her diseased mind, as she did until she simply dropped dead. Elizabeth suspected that the foul brain rot that afflicted her father may have wrapped its grimy hands around her mother too, back in those days, though at least then it had the mercy to do her in quickly. So, with a self-satisfied smile, she gave the request no further thought than to answer it with the first thing that she could think of, a pair of smoking glasses. The bird tilted its head once more and flew off as if on cue. Elizabeth sniffed and licked her dry lips, suddenly overcome by anxiety. What was she doing? Sitting idly, daydreaming, while in another room her father was alone. She felt his scornful eyes upon her again, despite the fact that he was nowhere to be seen. Enough of this. Collecting herself, she stood up, took a deep breath, and hurried back towards the living room. Dinner in the Parsons household was often a sorry state of affairs. Elizabeth was hardly a cook, and she frequently found herself having to make do with the limited budget of her diminishing wealth. Caring for him was a full-time job in of itself, so the money had to last until either one of them kicked the bucket. With the scars on her wrist, Elizabeth wasn't too sure who that'd be anymore. Regardless, the pair sat at the table in the dimly lit dining room and ate. Tonight's meal was a rather simple spaghetti bolognese from a jar. Elizabeth had neglected to make her homemade version since the last time when it was spat back out in her face. As she leant over her plate, she played endlessly with the noodles, something she would always be scolded for as a girl. Her not having eaten all day did nothing to encourage her to put the food to her mouth. Her appetite seemed less and less with each passing week. Her father, on the other hand, wolfed down the processed calories like a man starved, caring not for the sauce caked around his mouth, which betrayed those ideals of manner he'd so desperately tried to instill in his daughter. His eating habits seemed to change with the wind. Sometimes he'd reject food he had enjoyed for years beforehand, instead opting for a moldy orange or the spoiled leftovers of something he'd refused to eat at the time. It was behavior that, on paper, was infantilizing, but did nothing to dispel Elizabeth's fear of him. Sometimes he'd even look at her like she was the one doing things wrong, making him feel uncomfortable. Moving to finally pop a meatball into her mouth, she elbowed a glass of water onto her lap. "Shit," she whispered. "1 minute, Dad." There was a stack of paper towels in the other room. Rounding the corner, she plucked a few off the top of the pile and hurried back to her seat. "Do you remember nights like this, Liz?" Elizabeth froze. Her father was standing now, at the end of the table, a sliver of drool edging its way out of the corner of his mouth. Instead of being hunched over as he usually was, looking towards the floor, he was stiffly upright, awake, and alert. It was a side of him she rarely got to see anymore, and she would have relished the moment of clarity if she did not know what it entailed. Fine food, the record player on. He began humming some familiar tune, something old and slow and sweet. Its name evaded her, but she definitely recognized it, well enough that she started to shake. He was striding now, taking long rhythmic steps towards her, as if in time with the song. It didn't end until he was pressed right up beside her, and she had to crane her head upwards to even look at him. She was a small girl. Even with his shrunken frame, her father stood around a foot taller than her. "Don't you miss it?" Elizabeth swallowed, her eyes awash with uncried tears. She was aware of the way the dementia worked by now. Sometimes a fleeting memory from a bygone year would pervade her father's mind, and he would demand immersion. Nothing less would satisfy. She noticed how tight the front of his pants looked, and as she opened her mouth to speak, he slipped a hand down her front.